Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Golf Guru Show. On this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. It's just going to be me solo answering some of your questions. I really appreciate everybody checking out the podcast, and I appreciate all the questions that we got. You can send your questions in if you want me to answer a few questions for the coaches and for the students, I guess, but this is mostly a show about coaches helping coaches. So we're looking at the teachers, especially the young teachers out there that are really interested in getting better. You can send your questions to golfgurushow@gmail.com, golfgurushow@gmail.com. And I got a couple of really good questions that I'm going to cover today. And I also want to share with you a document that a young man sent me after he had shadowed me for a couple of days watching me teach. So let's get to the first question. And this one is from One Fix Wonder. And he asks, if you had one go-to fix for the majority of your students, what would it be? Hashtag Golf Guru Show. I love this podcast, and I'm sure you can tell based on our conversation. So obviously this is somebody that I know, and I appreciate the question. One Fix Wonder. As we know out there in the teaching business, there is no one fix. But thinking about this question, what I work on a lot with, I'd say, the average golfer out there, I tend to see, I would say, more open club faces than closed. I tend to see more paths that move to the left than to the right. This is just a blanket statement, obviously. So I'd say to answer this question without getting into too much, the first thing I would say is I would tend to want to move more towards a closing club face at the top of the backswing. That would be one that I think would probably help more than hurt. And two, move more towards a shallowing sort of sweet spot behind the hand path transition, which I think could help pretty much everybody and get them moving more towards a rightward path. Like I said, this is kind of a loaded question, but it's really good, especially for young coaches out there that a lot of times might have a difficulty diagnosing the student in front of them. Obviously we start with ball flight and try to improve that, but working backwards, I would say for the club golfer that comes to me and is either slicing or hitting sort of weak fades, and they're looking for more distance, I would probably, in most cases, aside from having an extremely weak grip, I would try to change their wrist angles at the top of the backswing, move their lead wrist more into flexion, right wrist, we're talking about a right-handed golfer here, more into extension to sort of give them an assist in swinging a little bit more from inside out. A lot of times, and this again, this is not everybody, but the average golfer tends to, I would say, react to the club face a lot. So if we've got somebody that's already hitting the ball to the right or curving the ball to the right, and we're asking them to swing in that direction, I think it's a very difficult concept for the average golfer to sort of get their head around. So I oftentimes will adjust or make a club face adjustment or fix to get the golf ball moving closer or flying closer to the direction that the path is moving, which I think a lot of times allows them to trust that feeling of getting the sweet spot behind the hand path in transition, and moving the club path more to the right, which is going to help them obviously immediately. So good question. I mean, again, we can go in a lot of different directions here, but I think that's a good solid place to start if you are stuck with a student, and obviously if the ball is going to the right, I think it's an easy place to start, and you can sort of work backwards from there. So great question. One fix wonder. All right, on to question number 2. This one is from Curious George. Curious George asks, what would you do to help those who struggle to picture the path of the putt? So this is a putting question, i.e. they bomb the Mamba test, which should, for those of you who have watched me teach, this is a green reading test where I use a rope to have them draw the picture out. Aside from doing aim point, any ways you found to help people to see the curve? Thanks in advance. Great question from Curious George. And something that I've learned and stole from my friend John Graham is I will give them barriers and try to, when we do these breaking putts, I'll set them up with a 3 to 4% breaking putt. So we've got some decent curves so they can see it. And then I will give them some barriers of helping them to find different solutions to the same problem, as I would call it. And I've been doing this a lot with some of my tour players, but it works great with the average golfer as well. Is I'll set them up so I'll have them read the putt as they would with, let's just say, ideal pace, which is maybe 6 to 12 inches past the hole. And then I will ask them to find the highest line that they can start the ball on to still make the putt. So it'd be obviously sort of die in speed. And then I'll also ask them to find the lowest line that they could start the ball on. And it really gives them a great picture of some different options. So it gives them sort of a window, or sort of a cone, if you will, of different solutions to the same problem. And it doesn't get them locked in to saying, "Oh, this is the only place I can start the ball. This is the only speed that I can hit the ball in order to make this putt." Help them sort of self-discover what works for them. Now, obviously, the low line is going to be dangerous, especially on steep slopes, and we figure that out. But it's still a great exercise to see how hard they can hit the ball and still make it, and then see how soft they can hit the ball and still make it. So, it gives them that really great picture, even, if they're poor green readers. And I always tell them, just kind of let them talk to you and let them give you the feedback that I think is really, really helpful. I had a student out yesterday, just an average, like 15 handicap. We did this exercise, and he says, "Wow, this is really helpful, because now I understand why, when I have conflict, or I'm not sure about the putt and what it's going to do, the reason why I hit it too hard, and if I miss it, then I'm bringing 3 putts into play." And he said, what I really learned from this exercise is, the higher line, if we overread it, 1, it's going to have a better chance to go in, especially on steeper slopes, but 2, that we're going to start eliminating 3 putts, because even if they leave it a little bit short and low, they're still going to have a good chance to make that second putt. So I think that's a really interesting thing. If you guys have followed me on Snapchat, follow me on Snapchat at Golf Guru 1. I posted some videos of me working with one of my tour players doing this, and he went out the next day and shot 6 under and played really well. And he said the visualization of just seeing lines and different places he can start the ball, and then committing to that distance choice really helped him to putt better. So I think we're on to something. Thank you, Mr. John Graham, for sharing that with me. And I continue to learn from all my friends that swipe and deploy, as he says. So appreciate that. And barriers are a big deal. I mean, I think you can use that in different parts of the game as well. But give them some barriers, and then let them kind of figure it out, and then just be willing to be quiet for a minute and watch them start to problem solve. I think that's a wonderful way to teach people and to get them to learn and become part of the learning process. All right, so thanks so much for the questions. Those are just a couple. I got several, but I thought those were really good. So once again, send your questions into golfgurushow@gmail.com, and I'll try to get to those maybe once a week when I'm calling Guru Fridays. It may not always be posted on Friday, but we just wanted to have something at the end of the week that could possibly, help you with your teaching. So we appreciate that. So next, I want to talk about a great document that a young man sent me that came and shadowed me for a couple of days. Oftentimes when these coaches come to watch me, especially the young coaches that are really sort of new to the teaching game and trying to learn, as a way for me to help mentor them is I get them to take notes, which most of them do anyways, but I get them to submit to me after a day or so of contemplation of what they saw me do, what they learned. I make them do a little paper for me. So I always say, write down your top 10 things that you learned this week or the couple of days or one day that you watch me teach. And I think it's a good exercise for them, but it's also really good for me because it allows me to see what's coming through and what I'm teaching. So it helps me to sort of evaluate my teaching and see, what their takeaways are. So I thought this was interesting that this young man actually sent me 14. I may not go through all of them, but I'm just talk about a few of them that I think were interesting. So number one, these are just highlights, and then I will sort of go into depth on some of these, but balls of the feet are great for jumping. Heels are great for rotating. So he said, I think this is interesting. What reactions can happen if somebody is trying to rotate while the pressure is in their toes and vice versa? Seeing you use body track was really beneficial in helping me make sense of some of these sensations in my head. So this is something we all probably know, especially guys out there that are using pressure mats. I think very, very helpful to look at not only where the pressure is right or left, but also front and back of the feet. And something I really have been digging into in short game is for those players that are having trouble rotating their body or rotating their torso, most of the time if you throw them on body track or swing catalyst or whatever you're using out there, it's very difficult to rotate if you're out on your toes. And this is why so many people have trouble with some of the ball striking, even with full swing, is I like to get them, more stable in their feet, right and left, so they can actually rotate and create some rotational forces as well as vertical forces, which I think jumping is very beneficial if it's at the right time. So something that I thought was pretty cool that this kid, this young man, took away. So number two, constantly changing conditions after concept is taught, and I think this is a very important point to note. And he said, I noticed, especially in the short game, after you taught them the concept, you continually wanted them in different situations and flighting the ball at different trajectories. I think this simulates play very well and keeps them from just hitting the same shot over and over. And this is something that we talked about in the podcast with James Ridyard that he does really well, is don't let them get comfortable, right? After they've hit a couple of good shots and you feel like they're developing some skills, is change the environment. Always be testing them and sort of pushing them into uncomfortable situations with, shots they can't hit. We want them to succeed, but also, if we're going to get the player to perform on the golf course, then we got to keep kind of pushing the boundaries of the different environments that we can put them on. If you're in the bunker, throw them in the back of the bunker or the front of the bunker. I think is a really good lesson learned. Number three, putting to the coin instead of the hole, i.e. matching the intention. And he said, I thought this drill was great because a lot of people let the hole get in the way of what they are trying to accomplish. If you focus on line and speed it takes to get to the coin, the hole will just get in the way. Also, feel like it would help them visualize and commit to the putt very well. And I think that's very well said. And it's, again, something that I stole from John Graham. And one of the first things that I do when I give a putting lesson is sort of test their ability to match up the distance choice, which is how far the ball rolls, and the line. It's the ultimate putting drill, putting test. I think John even credits Chris Como for coming up with this, because it's the basis of putting, in my opinion. If they can stop the ball somewhere around the poker chip or the quarter or the ball mark on the green, then I think if they understand where the hole should be, which isn't sort of the last part, then it's going to be a very successful putting lesson. So that was very good. The next one, which I think is really important, let them make their mistakes and allow them to self-teach. And this is something that I've really been working on with my teaching, is not just hammering my students with technical information the entire time, is sort of giving them, spoon-feeding some information, and then really letting them sort of figure it out, and then allowing them to give me feedback by, asking open-ended questions. So the young man said, "This was great for me, how you allowed them to figure out what they were doing wrong on their own and really help them in the long run. I noted a few ways that you accomplished this. What could we do to make so-and-so better, or do this better? You be the coach." I'll often say that, you be the coach. I'll make a swing and show them a model. And it says, explain to me why you think the ball is going where it is. So just having them take some ownership of understanding what the golf ball does and why, I think is huge. And also, you can apply that to any part of your lessons, which I think is very, very valuable. The next question was, or the next takeaway was, the more problems because of where they enter the sand, not how much sand is taken. And obviously this was a bunker lesson that we did. And the first thing that I point out to my students is most people struggle in the bunkers because the entry point is too far back. It's not so much that they can't hit the sand. A lot of times it's they don't hit the sand in the right place. I think if you can help them understand that I want more of the divot in front of the golf ball, even though we're talking an inch, 2 inches behind the ball is very acceptable for entry point. I'm not as much concerned about the depth of the divot or the sort of the down and up of the low point, of more where the low point or the entry point starts. And low point's probably going to be somewhere just short of the golf ball, or maybe even under the ball is acceptable. But if you can help them to understand that, I use a line drill. It's pretty basic, but if you can just get some awareness of where they're actually hitting the sand, it's usually very, very helpful to the player. And then start to build in some pieces that are going to help them to move that low point or move that entry point a little bit more forward. The next takeaway, I think, is one of the things that I've been doing a lot lately, and he just labeled it as arm straight drill, and I call it 3/4 arm straight. He said, I love this drill, and the thing, most of your students saw immediate results from it. I noted that it can help with sequencing, start direction, low point control, and then tightening up the swing, as you mentioned in the lesson, which I assume you meant in terms of improving sequence. Yeah, this is a great thing to, I think, work on with any level of player, especially when we're trying to get them to hit the ball a little more solid. It is just a 3/4 backswing, and then try to get them to finish with their arms relatively straight. For you golfing machine guys out there, kind of the flying wedge, I would say would be a good way to assimilate this. But you see a lot of good players, especially on tour now, that sort of hold-off looking finish. Tommy Fleetwood, Patrick Reed, even Tiger. Sometimes you see these kind of straight arm finishes, little 3/4 flighted shots, and I call it the litmus test. This is something that I really see guys like Dennis Sales out there, a good buddy of mine that does this a lot with his kids, and there's so much value. And I call it the litmus test because basically if they can't do it, then they're probably out of sequence, and something needs to change with the order of their transition, or so I always give them a sort of a little test of, or an order of importance, to say, all right, number one is we're going to hit it solid, and then number two, we're going to work on start direction. And then once they hold their finish and they can kind of evaluate themselves, they can see whether they need a little bit more rotation into club face, less rotation of the club face, what's going on, is the lead wrist extended too early. So it's so valuable, and I think a huge takeaway if you get your players to kind of do that. Plus it becomes a nice tool to play flighted shots into the wind. So I'm glad that he mentioned that, because I think it's a really, really good exercise that I use with a lot of my. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but a couple of them I thought that were really valuable is always brought them back to the drill if the concept was being messed up by the full swing. So if you did a lot, I think it helps this maintain control in the lesson and continue to reinforce the concepts being taught. So basically my sort of structure in a lesson is I'll have them hit a couple of shots as we're working on things. If we hit 2 bad shots, then we go back to the drill. All right, so we'll do the drill for a little bit. Drill starts to take effect, and then we'll go back to hitting shots. So it's just sort of a back into skill development type of situation where, you don't let them mess up too long, but you want to help them to figure it out and let them do a little bit on their own, but bring them back to that drill, which I think was really, really good. And then the last one that I'll share with you was he labeled it right foot flare allows for more hip turn, delays hip turn and forward swing, and helps stopping the humping move, right? So early extension, for those of you that understand that, I call it humping the ball. But big on foot flare. I think it really helps most folks, especially the club player that needs a little more rotation. If you're blocking them in, I think with the right foot, it basically keeps your hips from turning as much. So I like to get that right hip moving up and behind them with good hip tilts. And I think a little bit of foot flare helps, and especially in the downswing. Something that I learned years ago from my friend Chuck Evans is you got somebody that maybe their right knee's kicking in towards the ball, or the hips or the pelvis is moving towards the ball. If you get them a little more foot flare, it makes it a little more difficult and helps to keep that right foot and right heel down just a little bit longer, which will create space and create a lot more value for that transition and the area coming into impact. So really good takeaways. And the last thing, which I'll share, that he said is your communication is some of the best out of anyone I've learned from, knowing when to say something / when not to say something, building rapport with their students, giving them the best environment and information to learn effectively, etc. So I thought that was very kind of this young man to share that, and I appreciate that. And something that I try to pass on to my staff is, learn to, ask the proper questions, but then learn to be quiet and get the feedback so you can really apply that to the lesson. And I think that's a skill in itself for sure that I can leave the young coaches with out there. And it happens over time. It's experience is really a big thing in teaching, and something that you'll continue to work on. If you watch the good teachers teach, you'll see them talk a lot less, and then impart information in the right time. So again, hope you enjoyed this episode. If you can leave questions at the email golfgurushow@gmail.com, that would be great, and I'll try to answer the questions when I get to the podcast for the end of the week at Guru Friday. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave me a review, give me some feedback, and you can find me on Twitter at GolfGuruTV and also Instagram. So tweet me, send me a direct message if that's easier, to let me know if you enjoyed this type of format. And typically I'm having guests on with some long interviews that will be coming up the next couple of weeks. But I enjoy doing these solo missions occasionally, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you next time. Until then, study, practice, teach, and we'll talk to you next time.